Dr. Liam Thornton, an Associate Professor in Law in UCD School of Law. The question of law and its relationship with human rights is a complex one. So in this session, I want to first speak to you broadly about the concept of human rights. I then want to focus our attention on whether we can identify a right to housing or a right to a home under human rights law. Then I want to very briefly speak to you about kind of challenges and opportunities that studying human rights law can bring. When we speak of human rights, we can probably all think of examples of what human rights are. A right not to be tortured, rights to fair trials, rights to respect for private and family life, rights to practice religion, express political views, and a right to be treated equally regardless of one's sexual orientation or their gender identity. So human rights encompass a broad array of rights which we all as human persons should be entitled to. Now, the examples we've provided are just a very small number of examples of human rights. Human rights law is much broader than just simply prohibitions on the state or other individuals from violating rights. For example, what if we experience homelessness? Do we have a right under human rights law to be provided with a home? And the answer to that question is complex. So let's focus for the next few minutes on that issue of this concept of a right to a home. Because we all know within Ireland over the last number of years, the issue of housing has been one of significant political controversy. As of March 2020, nearly 10,000 people in Ireland had been homeless. Almost 1/3 of all homeless people in Ireland are children. As lawyers, a question then emerges. If we have a right to a home, and if this is a legal right, where do we find such a right? Can you identify any legal documents where we might be able to base a claim on saying that individuals have a right to a home? If you were to look at international human rights law, laws that over the years Irish governments have agreed to comply with, well, that might provide us with some form of starting point. Various United Nations human rights treaties that the Irish state has freely committed to complying with provide that in essence everybody has a right to housing. Yet this international legal obligation has not been placed precisely into Irish domestic law. So just because the Irish state agreed to be bound by this does not necessarily mean an individual can go to a court and demand from a judge that Ireland comply with its international legal obligation that it freely accepted. What about the Constitution? I'm sure you may all have heard of the Irish Constitution or at least know of its existence. So starting with the Irish Constitution as primary law of the state, well, the Irish Constitution does not explicitly provide that individuals are entitled to housing or have a right to housing. The Irish courts have been exceptionally cautious in recognising what we might label a right to a home. If we were to look at the Irish Constitution, for example, you won't find any statement within the fundamental rights provisions of the Constitution that states explicitly a right to a home must be provided. So yes, the Constitution must protect individuals as best it can from unjust attack, protect an individual's life, person, good name, and property rights. But what happens where an individual is in a position, due to their poverty, that they cannot provide themselves with a home? Does that not mean that their bodily integrity may be compromised if some form of housing, some form of shelter is not provided? Now, the Irish courts, as well as other courts in other jurisdictions, have in essence determined that whether a political legal system provides for a right to a home or a right to housing, that's a political choice. It's not, it should not be recognised or interpreted into a legal document where that legal document does not expressly and explicitly provide, for example, that there is a right to a home or a right to housing. Now, I and others would contend that that's a very narrow reading, even a conservative reading of the Constitution. In February 2014, The Irish Constitutional Convention requested that the Irish state provide for the protection of a right to housing in the Constitution. To date, successive Irish governments have not acted upon this recommendation, but the recommendations have been referred on to an Oireachtas or parliamentary committee for further consideration. Studying human rights law can be a challenge. Often rights can be identified, but there may be significant limitations on such rights. Can you maybe identify any limitations that there may be with this concept of a right to a home? That limitation may be due to, say, a lack of state finances. It may be due to, democratic majorities not wanting there to be a provision or entitlement of a right to a home. Yet law also provides a tool for argument. Law provides a tool for agitation. Law provides tools for making not only a legal claim, but also the moral claim that an individual's dignity, bodily integrity, respect that is due to all, due to their human personhood, may be violated due to a lack of housing. Now, the issue of a right to a home or right to housing is exceptionally complex. What I've been able to present is just an overview of some key concepts within international human rights law. Significant questions about, how would a right to a home be funded? Is it appropriate for the judiciary to make a decision on whether a right to housing or a right to a home has been upheld by government or by parliament? All those questions are issues that you explore throughout the entirety of your law degree. Now, in UCD School of Law, you have access to an unparalleled number of courses within many specialised fields, and my particular field of interest, of course, being human rights. Our graduates within human rights have excelled in a lot of areas such as journalism, within politics, as lawyers within Ireland and many other jurisdictions, as well as agitating for the rights of marginalised and vulnerable communities throughout the globe. Now, I have your view on whether there should be a right to a home. I hope this brief presentation has at least made you think, made you reflect, and provided you with a taster of one of the many countless legal issues that you'll have an opportunity to study in UCD School of Law. And I look forward, I hope, to seeing some of you at open days, or indeed in in a year or two, studying law with us in UCD. Thank you.